The ocean had a way of swallowing sound, turning even the loudest human heartbeat into something distant, something unimportant. For 23-year-old Marisol Andrade, that silence felt like a verdict. She stood at the edge of the cargo ship's upper deck, her hands gripping the rusted railing until her knuckles whitened, the cold metal biting her skin as if warning her to turn back. But she couldn't. There was nothing to return to, nothing but a grave she had not even been able to afford a headstone for. The wind slapped her hair across her face, strands stinging her cheeks like tiny lashes. She didn't bother fixing it. Sheila hadn't bothered with much, since the day they covered her mother's body with a thin hospital sheet. Before the illness took her voice, her mother used to speak like someone who believed the world was still repairable. Andahit un día vas a tener una vida mejor en one day. Daughter, one day you will have a better life. But one day had come and gone many times, leaving them colder, hungrier, smaller, and when her mother's lungs finally surrendered, that phrase became a ghost in Marisol's chest. Something she wanted to believe but couldn't carry anymore. The ship churned forward through the Atlantic, its engines vibrating the very floor beneath her thin sneakers. She lived in a cramped supply closet repurposed for stowaways like her, sleeping curled between crates of canned food and cleaning solvents that burned her throat when she inhaled too deeply. Her backpack faded, frayed, stitched 3 times, with mismatched thread, held her entire existence. One change of clothes, an old toothbrush, and a photograph of her mother taken long before poverty bent her like an old reed. The photo was creased, edges soft as cloth from being held too many times. Marisol kept it sealed inside a plastic bag as carefully as one might guard a fortune. She had traded everything she owned for the passage. The smuggler had taken even her shoes, replacing them with beat-up sneakers that flapped at the heel when she walked. But she hadn't argued. Negotiating with men like him meant risking your life becoming collateral damage. So she had nodded, handed over the little her mother had left behind, and boarded that cargo ship with the kind of fear that hollows the bones. Now, 7 days into the crossing, she felt suspended between 2 worlds, one that had never welcomed her, and another that would likely try to crush her before she could learn its rules. The ocean stretched endlessly on all sides, gray and unforgiving, yet somehow still promising, or maybe she was imagining that promise. Maybe hope, like hunger, had its own hallucinations. At night, she listened to the sounds of the ship, the hum of steel, the hiss of vents, the low murmur of men whose faces she never saw. Sometimes she cried quietly, pressing her sleeve to her mouth so the guards wouldn't hear. Other times she simply lay awake, feeling the swell of the waves beneath her like a giant breath. She wondered if America had room for someone like her, someone with no English beyond a few phrases, someone with hands rough from years in the fish-packing shed back in Puerto Barrios. She wondered whether she would survive long enough to find out. On the 8th morning, land appeared, just a faint smear on the horizon at first, then slowly sharpening into shapes she recognized from the only book she had ever owned, Ciudades del Mundo. The skyline rose like a jagged crown, dark and majestic against the pale dawn. New York. It looked like a dream drawn by someone with too much imagination and too little mercy. Marisol's breath caught. For a moment, her mother's voice returned. Gentle and imposible un día, hija. She pressed the plastic-wrapped photograph to her chest and closed her eyes. When the ship docked, she slipped out with the workers unloading crates, moving quickly, head down, trying to mimic their purpose. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her. In a strange way, that invisibility comforted her until she stepped off the ramp and the winter wind sliced straight through her thin sweater. She gasped, folding her arms around herself. She had never known cold like this. It felt like punishment. New York was louder than she expected. The horns, the shouting, the rumbling of trucks vibrating the pavement seemed designed to keep a newcomer disoriented. People rushed around her as if they had forgotten how to walk slowly. She whispered the only English phrase she had memorized, sorry, each time she bumped someone's shoulder. No one acknowledged her apology. No one acknowledged her at all. After hours of wandering, feet numb, she found a bench inside a subway station and sat with her backpack between her legs, guarding it with crossed arms. She didn't sleep. She only watched the people come and go, businessmen with heavy coats, students with steaming cups of coffee, older women carrying bags bigger than her hopes. She noticed that everyone avoided one another's eyes, as if connection itself were an inconvenience. Back home, even strangers had looked at each other. By the second night, hunger gnawed at her stomach so sharply she doubled over on the bench. A cleaner shooed her away. She drifted through the station like smoke, trying to stay warm, trying not to cry. The next morning, she attempted to ask a vendor for a small cup of coffee, placing the few coins she had left on the counter. He looked at her, shook his head, and waved dismissively. The coins weren't enough, or maybe he simply didn't want to deal with her. She walked away before he had the chance to push her aside. Days bled into one another, each colder than the last. Marisol slept in patches, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, always half waking in panic that someone was taking her backpack. One night she dreamed her mother sat beside her on the subway bench, brushing her hair the way she used to when Marisol was a child. When she woke, her cheeks were damp, and the ache in her chest felt almost physical. By the end of her first week in America, she was no longer sure she would survive a second. Her vision blurred sometimes when she stood up too quickly. Her lips cracked from the cold. A dull, ever-present headache pulsed behind her eyes. She tried to ask for work at a few bodegas and restaurants, repeating the sentence she had practiced in the mirror of a dirty subway bathroom. I help clean. I work for small money. Most owners shook their heads. One man laughed. Another pointed to the door without lifting his gaze. She walked until her legs trembled, until the city changed shape around her, until she found herself beneath the Manhattan Bridge, surrounded by concrete pillars coated with graffiti. The river wind was brutal there, icy and sharp, whipping through the loose holes in her sneakers. She sat on the ground, leaning against a cold pillar, hugging her backpack as if it could shelter her. She felt dizzy, empty. Her fingers had gone numb entirely. For the first time since leaving Guatemala, she whispered aloud, Mama. No puedo más amor, primera que yo en ti anymore. The sky blurred. The world went soft around the edges. She closed her eyes. That was the moment a shadow fell across her, blocking the wind. Footsteps approached cautiously, not the rushed, irritated kind she had grown used to hearing, but slow, deliberate, almost gentle. She didn't open her eyes. She thought maybe it was another officer telling her to move. But then, a woman's voice, warm and unfamiliar, spoke above her. Are you all right? Can you hear me? Marisol's eyes fluttered open, and she saw a middle-aged woman holding an umbrella despite the absence of rain, her face lined with worry. This was the moment her life would split in two, the before and the after. Tug said, didn't he know it yet? She only knew she was too tired to answer. The woman knelt slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt if startled. Her umbrella tilted slightly, shielding Marisol from the slicing wind. Up close, Marisol noticed details her dizziness had blurred at first glance. The woman's hair was pulled back in a loose bun streaked with gray. Her coat simple but neat. Her gloves worn at the fingertips, as though she used them often. There was nothing threatening about her. Nothing hurried or annoyed, only concern. Only concern. Real concern, the kind Marisol had not seen since her mother's last lucid days. I'm Evelyn, the woman said softly, her breath visible in the freezing air. Can you stand? Marisol shook her head. She didn't trust her voice. It felt trapped somewhere between her ribs. Evelyn studied her more carefully, recognizing the signs of exhaustion and hunger with a familiarity that suggested she had once known them herself. Without hesitation, she slipped an arm beneath Marisol's shoulders, lifting with gentle insistence. Marisol's legs wobbled like thin reeds. The world tilted, threatening to topple, but Evelyn held her steady. We're going somewhere warm, she murmured, guiding her away from the icy concrete. Just lean on me. The city continued its indifferent rhythm around them, cars honking, feet pounding the sidewalk. Conversations clipped by urgency, but somehow the noise felt distant now, muffled by the shocking tenderness of this stranger's touch. Marisol tried to keep her balance, clinging to her backpack as though it contained the last piece of her identity. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She didn't know why she allowed this woman to help her. Maybe because resisting required strength she no longer possessed. Maybe because the human body knows instinctively when it is safe. Evelyn flagged down a yellow cab with one sharp wave. The driver glanced at them through the window, his expression a mix of suspicion and annoyance, but after a moment, he unlocked the doors. Inside, heat blasted from the vents with such force it made Marisol flinch. The sudden warmth stung her fingers as circulation began returning, a pain almost worse than the cold itself. She curled her hands into fists, trying not to whimper. Evelyn noticed. "It's all right. Happens to everyone who's been in the cold too long. You're safe now, sweetheart." Her tone was gentle but firm, the way someone might speak to a frightened child who hadn't been comforted in years. The cab cut through the city, weaving between lanes. Buildings streaked past the window, blurred by the fog of Marisol's breath on the glass. She tried to speak to explain she had no money, no address, no right to accept help, but the English words tangled on her tongue. She swallowed hard, then whispered, "No pay. I cannot pay." Evelyn shook her head. "I didn't ask you to." Those 5 words hit Marisol in a place deeper than hunger, deeper than fear. They hit the place where dignity had been eroded, grain by grain, by every rejection she'd endured since stepping onto American soil. She lowered her gaze to her hands, ashamed of how visibly they trembled. They arrived at a modest brick building in Brooklyn, a structure that looked neither like an institution nor a home, but something quietly in between. The entrance had a narrow awning, and beside the door hung a faded sign with peeling letters to Mercer Room Community Shelter. Evelyn paid the driver quickly. Then she helped Marisol inside, guiding her through a small hallway that smelled faintly of detergent and warm soup. The shelter was simple but clean. A row of cots lined one wall, each with folded blankets. A few women sat near a heater, sipping something steaming from paper cups. Their eyes lifted as Marisol entered. Some tired, some curious, none unkind. The heat wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, and for a moment she felt lightheaded, almost drunk with relief. Evelyn led her to a cot in the corner. "Sit," she instructed gently. Then she returned moments later with a bowl of lentil soup and a soft roll. The aroma alone nearly brought Marisol to tears. She gripped the bowl with both hands, careful not to drop it, and took slow, cozy sips. Warmth bloomed down her throat, into her stomach, radiating outward, like a small sun. She ate quietly, aware of Evelyn's watchful gaze. "You're not from here," Evelyn said after a moment, pulling a metal chair beside the cot. Not an accusation, an observation. Marisol shook her head. "Guatemala?" The word came out hushed, fragile. "And you're alone?" Another nod. Another nod. Evelyn inhaled softly, the kind of breath someone takes when a flood of memories rises uninvited. She looked at Marisol with a tenderness that felt almost maternal. "I was in your shoes once. Different country, different circumstances, but the same cold." Her eyes drifted briefly to the window where dusk was settling like ash. "You don't owe me your story." "Not tonight. But you're safe here. Stay as long as you need." It was more kindness than anyone had given Marisol since her mother's death. She lowered her gaze again, too overwhelmed to speak. Hours passed slowly. The shelter grew quieter as the women settled into their cots. Evelyn moved through the space with practiced eyes, adjusting blankets, checking the thermostat, offering tea. Sometimes she glanced at Marisol, as if making sure she was still there, still breathing. Marisol watched her with cautious fascination. Why would a woman like her, well-dressed, composed, still spend nights caring for strangers? Later, when the room had dimmed to a soft golden glow, Evelyn returned to Marisol's side with a cup of chamomile tea. "Drink before bed," she said. "It helps the nerves settle." Marisol hesitated, then accepted it. "Why you help me?" she asked, her accent heavy, her English imperfect but clear enough. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She sat on the edge of the neighboring cot and clasped her gloved hands in her lap. "Because someone once helped me when I thought I wouldn't make it to another day." She looked at Marisol with eyes that carried a private ache. "And because you remind me of myself at 20. A silence settled between them, warm and tentative. Marisol sipped the tea. Her hands steadied. For the first time in many weeks, she felt something close to safety. Not security, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of it. When the lights dimmed fully, Marisol lay down beneath the blanket, pulling it up to her chin. The mattress was thin, the pillow a little lumpy, but to her it felt luxurious, like sinking into a cloud. Her body unclenched slowly, releasing tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. As she drifted toward sleep, she glanced toward the doorway where Evelyn stood speaking softly to another woman. Marisol watched her silhouette framed by the faint hallway light and thought, with growing disbelief, that maybe Jasmavici had crossed an ocean not to meet a crueler world, but to meet this stranger with an umbrella who had stopped when no one else had. She closed her eyes. For the first time since leaving Guatemala, the darkness didn't feel threatening. It felt like rest. Marisol woke before dawn, disoriented by the quiet. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't the low, corrugated metal roof of the fish-packing shed, nor the damp overhang beneath the Manhattan Bridge. It was smooth, painted, illuminated faintly by the orange glow of a nearby street. She blinked, letting the stillness settle. Her body felt heavy but warm, wrapped in the unfamiliar comfort of a blanket that had not belonged to her mother, had not traveled through ports or ships or subway stations. A soft clatter sounded from the small communal kitchen. She sat up slowly, smoothing her tangled hair, and made her way toward the noise. There, standing over a pot of simmering oatmeal, was Evelyn. Her back was turned, her shoulders slightly hunched. The way someone stands when they've been awake far longer than their responsibilities require. She didn't hear Marisol's steps at first, but when Marisol approached the threshold, Evelyn turned as though sensing her presence. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and steady. "Did you sleep at all?" Marisol nodded then said, "Yes. Sleep good." Evelyn's smile widened gently. "Good. You looked like you needed it." She handed her a bowl, the steam curling upward like morning fog over warm earth. Marisol cupped it with both hands and took it back to her cot, savoring every spoonful. It was until she finished eating that she realized she had felt hunger, pains not the sharp, twisting kind she'd grown accustomed to for the first time in weeks. The other women began waking gradually. Some nodded at Marisol, others simply shuffled through their morning routines. There was a quiet, unspoken understanding among them. Everyone carried their own past, their own weight. No one asked intrusive questions, no one judged. Even in its faded paint and modest cots, the shelter felt like a place built on dignity. Later that morning, Evelyn returned with a small notebook and a cheap ballpoint pen. She pulled a chair beside Marisol's cot and said, "Let's talk about your next steps." The phrase made Marisol tense. Next steps implied expectations, commitments, directions she wasn't sure she could follow. She lowered her eyes, suddenly anxious. "I know have papers," she whispered. "No work. No English. Good. I know," Evelyn replied gently, "but everyone starts somewhere. Including me." Marisol looked up, drawn again to that tone calm, unhurried, unpitying. "You was like me?" she asked quietly. Evelyn nodded. "A long time ago. I came here with a suitcase that had more holes than fabric. Slept on park benches. Didn't know a single person. Didn't think I'd survive the first winter." Her fingers traced the edge of the notebook. "Someone helped me. A woman who ran a shelter not too different from this one. She taught me small things, how to apply for basic work, how to speak enough English to get by, how to believe I wasn't doomed to stay at the bottom." She closed the notebook softly. When she passed, I promised myself I would do for others what she did for me. A warmth spread across Marisol's chest, not the fragile warmth of soup or blankets, but the deeper kind that comes from being seen. Truly seen. For the next few days, Evelyn guided her through gentle, manageable tasks. She taught her how to say simple phrases more clearly, correcting her pronunciation without judgment. She gave her reading exercises from donated children's books, the same ones used in elementary schools. At first Marisol felt embarrassed reading sentences meant for 8, but Evelyn reminded her that language was a tool, not a measure of intelligence. In the afternoons, Evelyn introduced her to small cleaning jobs at local community centers. They paid little cash, slipped quietly into her palm after each shift, but they were enough to buy necessary things. a pair of socks without holes, a cheap winter hat, a second-hand coat that didn't let the wind bite quite so fiercely. Every purchase felt like a victory, a step toward reclaiming some sense of personhood. More importantly, the community centers exposed her to a world she had never imagined. Small businesses run by immigrants from every corner of the world, a Syrian baker who made flatbreads fragrant with a Korean seamstress who spoke no English but communicated entirely through gestures and warm smiles, a Dominican barber who sang while he worked and insisted on offering her coffee every time she passed. Marisol observed everything: how shop owners struggled with complicated paperwork, how they tried to attract customers with hand-painted signs, how they spoke of taxes and permits and online orders as if discussing storms they hoped would pass quickly. She didn't understand the details yet, but she understood the feeling. They were fighting for air in a country that didn't make breathing easy. One particular job would mark the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. A small bakery in Brooklyn needed help cleaning after hours. The owner, a tired but kind man named Mr. Russo, welcomed her with a weary smile. "You work hard," he told her on the first night, tapping his chest in a gesture of earnest gratitude. "Hard work, always welcome here." The bakery smelled of sugar and toasted flour, a scent that reminded Marisol faintly of markets back home. As she swept flour from the floor and wiped down counters, she watched Mr. Russo struggle with his laptop, frowning at the screen as though it held secrets he had no patience left to decode. She didn't understand much, but she recognized frustration. She recognized exhaustion. She recognized the helplessness in his sighs. One evening, as she took out the trash, she noticed a sign taped to the bakery window: "Online orders unavailable, system down." Even with her limited English, she understood the weight of it. People moved quickly in America. If a business couldn't keep up, it disappeared. That night, in the shelter, she turned to Evelyn with cautious curiosity. People. Shops. Need help for computers. 4. Internet things. Evelyn looked up from her paperwork. "They do," she said. "A lot of small businesses struggle with anything digital." Marisol hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. "I want to learn computers." She felt foolish, saying it aloud, as though wanting such a thing were an indulgence rather than a lifeline. But Evelyn didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss her. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a library card, and placed it gently into Marisol's hand. "Then, let's start," she said. It was such a small act. A piece of plastic, lightweight, ordinary, but to Marisol, it felt like the key to a locked world. She held it tightly, knowing that her life, her future might hinge on what she chose to do with it. The next morning, she walked into the public library with trembling hands and a pounding heart. The room smelled of dust and possibilities. Rows of computers lined the back wall, each screen glowing like a small square of hope. Taking a deep breath, she sat at one, placed her fingers on the keyboard, and whispered to herself, "Aprender. Learn." She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her path would shift, not with a dramatic revelation, but with slow, persistent curiosity. With hunger not for food, but for understanding. A spark had caught, and soon, it would grow into something much larger. The library became Marisol's second shelter, a place where the heat worked reliably, and the lights hummed softly overhead, where no one questioned her presence as long as she respected the quiet. She learned to arrive early, before most patrons filled the rows of computers, and she stayed until her eyes burned from the strain of reading English words she barely understood. The keyboard felt foreign beneath her fingertips. Each key a tiny mystery, but every hour she spent there chipped away at the fear that had once paralyzed her. She watched tutorials with subtitles, replaying them again and again until the concepts lodged themselves in her mind. She scribbled notes in the small notebook Evelyn had given her, misspelled words, diagrams, guesses, half-formed thoughts that slowly became clearer over time. Soon she began understanding what Mr. Russo had been struggling with at the bakery. Websites, online menus, payment systems, social media posts that reached no one because they were written without strategy. She learned how to create simple designs through free tools, how to schedule posts, how to read basic analytics. It felt like learning a new language and a new world at the same time. Her hunger returned. But this time it was for knowledge, not survival. Weeks passed. Her English improved. Her confidence, still fragile, began taking its first steps, like a newborn foal. In the evenings, when she arrived for her cleaning shift at the bakery, she would peek at Mr. Russo's laptop screen. He always sat at the small table near the ovens, muttering under his breath as he clicked through menus. One night she gathered enough courage to speak. "I help?" she asked, gesturing to the laptop. Mr. Russo sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "If you know how to make this thing stop freezing, you're a miracle!" She took the chair beside him and began clicking through the settings, her movements slow and cautious. She felt his eyes on her, skeptical but hopeful. After a few minutes, she managed to reload the page she had been trying to access. Then she helped him create a simple online order form using a free platform she had practiced with at the library. When she showed it to him, he leaned back, stunned. You did this?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. Small, but works." He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Marisol, this could help me more than any cleaning shift." Her cheeks warmed with pride she hadn't felt since childhood. For a brief moment, she wondered if her mother could see her if somewhere. Beyond the ocean she had crossed, her mother's spirit was nodding, whispering, "Sig, Haiga." Word spread quicker than she expected. The Dominican barber Shidi met through one of the cleaning jobs, asked her to help him post better pictures of his haircuts. The seamstress wanted an online schedule. A local bodega needed help updating its menu. Each time Marisol worked quietly, refusing to accept more than a few bills or a free meal. But even with her humility, people talked. They liked her seriousness, her patience, her willingness to learn their needs instead of pretending to already know everything. In a neighborhood of hardworking immigrants, sincerity went further than talent. "You're starting something," Evelyn told her one night when Marisol returned to the shelter glowing with accomplishment. "A seed. Maybe you don't see it yet, but it's growing." Marisol looked at her notebook, filled now with scribbles from dozens of small projects. "Maybe. Someday," she murmured, but fear gnawed at her. Fear that she wasn't allowed to dream that big. Fear that once people learned who she really was, woman without papers, without education, without even a proper pair of shoes, everything would collapse. Evelyn seemed to sense this. She placed a hand over Marisol's. "Listen to me. I've met hundreds of women in this shelter. Smart women, brave women. But you have something rare. You have vision. Don't shrink yourself just because the world tried to make you small." Those words stayed with Mary. They echoed in her ears each night as she lay on the cot, staring at the cracked ceiling, imagining a future she couldn't quite describe but felt pulsing beneath her skin. Something new, something hers. The turning point arrived on a windy Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Russo called her to the bakery earlier than usual. She arrived worried she'd done something wrong. But when she stepped inside, he was smiling, really smiling, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "You saved my business," he announced. Then he spun his laptop toward her. His online orders had tripled. Customers left comments praising the improved website. A local food blogger had even added the bakery to a list of must-try neighborhood spots. Marisol covered her mouth with her hands, stunned. She had thought she was helping him in small ways, barely noticeable ways. But suddenly, the work she had done in the dim corner of a library was changing real lives. "I want to pay you," Mr. Russo insisted. "Not for cleaning. For this. For whatever you call this magic." She shook her head immediately. "No magic. Just learning." He chuckled. "Then let me pay you for learning." He handed her an envelope containing her first $100 earned through digital work. Her chest tightened with emotion. It was different from the cash she earned cleaning floors. This money represented possibility. It represented a skill. It represented a future. That night, she showed Evelyn the envelope. Evelyn opened it, counted the bills carefully, then looked up with unmistakable pride. "This is your first seed," she said. "Plant it wisely." Over the next months, Marisol did exactly that. She saved every dollar she could. She bought a used laptop from a thrift store, its left hinge cracked but still functional. She worked from the shelter's common table, sometimes with children running around her, sometimes with women crying softly nearby, yet always focused, always steady. Her clients grew from a handful of neighborhood businesses to other shops across the borough. Many didn't care about her accent or her status. They cared that she understood them, that she uplifted them. Her English grew stronger. Her nights grew longer. Her confidence grew roots. Soon, she found herself staring at a blank screen where she typed, in slow, hesitant letters, Marisol Digital Solutions. It was the first time she named something after herself. The first time her identity was entitid to Los. By spring, she had enough clients to consider renting a tiny room, something she could call hers, even if it was no larger than a closet. Evelyn helped her search, walking with her through narrow Brooklyn streets, lined with brownstones and corner shops. They finally found a small, sunlit room in a building that smelled faintly of old wood and laundry detergent. The landlord didn't ask too many questions. The price was barely manageable, but Marisol accepted it. On the day she moved in, she stood in the empty room, filled with nothing but a mattress on the floor and her battered laptop. Yet she felt rich in a way she couldn't explain. She touched the wall, feeling its solidity, its certainty. For the first time since leaving Guatemala, she felt anchored. That night, she worked until the early hours of morning, her laptop casting a pale light across her small space. She designed logos, scheduled posts, built simple websites, sending drafts to clients who responded with appreciation she still wasn't accustomed to. But as dawn crept through the window, painting her walls gold, she realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building, and she wasn't building alone. She was building with the faith of a woman who had once stopped beneath a bridge and offered her warmth. Everything that came next, the expansion, the moment she would someday sign her first six-figure contract, would root itself in these quiet hours, these fragile beginnings. These nights of fierce hope stitched together with determination and borrowed Wi-Fi. But, for now, she closed her laptop, lay down on her mattress, and whispered into the soft morning light, Gracias, Mama. I'm getting closer. She believed it. For the first time, she truly believed it. Spring slipped into summer, and for the first time in her life, Marisol experienced warmth that wasn't tainted by misery. New York in June smelled of food carts and hot pavement, of blooming trees pressed between buildings like secrets, finally given permission to breathe. From the window of her tiny room, she watched the street below, fill with early morning deliveries, kids racing to catch the bus, women juggling bags and dreams. Life pulsed through the city in a way that mirrored the pulse in her own chest, steady, determined, unstoppable. Her work multiplied quickly. With each successful project, with every grateful client sending another her way, the world that once felt impossible to touch began bending, hoosed slightly in her direction. But success didn't come without cost. Her days were long, her nights longer. She battled exhaustion, guilt, fear that she was growing too fast and would break like glass under the pressure. Still, she pushed forward, fueled by a hunger to rewrite the narrative the world had written for women like her. Bilate Sumer, she had so many clients that organizing her work became a struggle. She crowded her notebook with deadlines and ideas, sketches of logos, drafts of schedules, reminders written in a mix of English and Spanish. One evening, overwhelmed, she knocked on Evelyn's office door at the shelter and admitted, I think I am drowning in my own work." Evelyn laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carried pride. "That's exactly when you start calling yourself a businesswoman." She handed Marisol a planner, crisp and new. "Every entrepreneur has a moment when success scares them even more than failure. Don't turn away from it." The word entrepreneur rolled through Marisol's mind like a foreign dream, one she wasn't sure she was brave enough to claim. But the next morning, she wrote it at the top of her planner anyway, and seeing it in her own handwriting changed something inside her. It made the impossible feel negotiable. Not long after, one of her clients, a small catering company, run by a Nigerian family, asked her to meet with an acquaintance who worked with local investors seeking to support immigrant-run businesses. The idea terrified her. She had never met an investor. She barely knew what they did. Her English still faltered under pressure, and she carried a deeper fear that the moment she stepped into a professional space, someone would look at her and see only the poor girl with the frayed backpack who had arrived with nothing. But Evelyn, as always, dismantled her fears gently. "Listen to me," she said, smoothing Marisol's collar before the meeting. "You don't go in there to beg. You go in there to show them what you've already built. Let them see the truth. You're not the one who needs saving. Your work stands on its own." Marisol carried that sentence like armor. The meeting took place in a modest co-working office, nothing intimidating, just glass partitions and rows of desks. The investor, a young woman named Priya, with warm eyes and a sharp business mind, listened intently as Marisol explained her services. At first, her voice trembled. Then, as she pulled out examples of her clients' growth websites she had built, analytics she had managed, social visibility she had amplified, her nerves eased. Priya nodded, asked questions, took notes. When the meeting ended, she shook Marisol's hand with genuine admiration. "You're not just talented," Priya said. "You understand community. Tate. Serrare. Let's talk more soon." It was the first time someone from the world of money looked at her not as a risk, but as potential. Weeks passed. More referrals came. A small grant arrived through a community entrepreneurship program Priya helped her apply for. The funds were modest but life-changing, enough to upgrade her equipment, enough to operate without the constant fear of collapse. She outgrew her little room, renting a slightly larger one, not luxurious, but bright and big enough to fit a proper desk. She began calling it her office, even though it doubled as her bedroom and dining room. "In the place," she cried quietly on nights when the weight of her progress overwhelmed her. Her company's name, Marisol Digital Solutions, started appearing on flyers in shop windows. Clients messaged her at all hours. Her phone buzzed like a heartbeat, a constant reminder that she had become needed in ways she once believed impossible. Yet with every milestone, one truth remained unchanged. She couldn't have built any of it without Evelyn. Evelyn, who checked her resume line by line. Evelyn, who practiced English with her on long evening walks. Evelyn, who sat at the back of coffee shops during her client meetings, just to give her courage. Evelyn, who never asked for anything in return. But time is not gentle, even to those who give without measure. And one winter afternoon 2 years after the day under the Manhattan Bridge, Evelyn fainted in the shelter kitchen. Marisol rushed to the hospital with her, holding her hand the entire way, refusing to let go, even when the doctors insisted she step back. Evelyn was diagnosed with a heart condition she had kept quiet for months. "You should have told me," Marisol whispered through tears. Evelyn smiled despite the exhaustion, brushing her thumb against Marisol's cheek. "You had enough on your shoulders. And anyway, I knew you'd be strong, stronger than I ever was." When Evelyn returned home weeks later, the shelter ran without her. Donations had slowed, and the staff was overwhelmed. Marisol saw the exhaustion in their faces, the strain in the building itself. It was then she realized something she had been carrying quietly for months. She wanted to give back what had been given to her, not eventually. Now. Her business had grown steadily. She had savings, real savings. She had clients, a reputation, resources. And deep in her heart, she had a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The day she signed the papers for her first major investment deal, she didn't celebrate in a fancy restaurant or buy anything extravagant. Instead, she took a cab to a building she had passed 1,000 times before without ever imagining it could be hers. The old, abandoned storefront just 2 blocks from where Evelyn first found her. The building was worn, forgotten, its bricks chipped, its windows cloudy with dust. But Marisol didn't see decay. She saw possibility. She saw a place that could become a sanctuary for women like her, for women who arrived with empty pockets but unbreakable will. She bought it outright, and she named it the Marisol Center for Women's Entrepreneurship. She didn't tell Evelyn until the renovations were finished. Fresh paint, new floors, bright rooms filled with computers and work tables. When she finally brought her there, Evelyn stopped in the doorway, one hand pressed to her heart. You did this," she whispered. Marisol nodded, her throat tight. "You built a bridge for me. Now I build one for others. Tears slid down Evelyn's cheeks. She pulled Marisol into her arms, holding her with the same warmth she had offered beneath the bridge years before. Only now, Marisol was no longer the trembling girl clinging to a frayed backpack. She was a woman rooted in her own strength, carrying generations of women with her. In the months that followed, the center filled with life women from every corner of the world learning English, learning digital skills, learning how to create the futures they deserved. Marisol walked through the space daily, offering guidance, listening to their struggles, reminding them of what she had once needed to hear. You are not too small for your dreams. One evening, long after classes ended, she stood alone in the main room. The soft glow of the overhead lights illuminated the walls where framed photographs of successful immigrant women now hung, women she had helped, women she admired. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, the same city that once tried to freeze her, starve her, break her. Now it reflected back at her like a partner, no longer an adversary, but a witness. She whispered, "Immigrants, Mama," and in the stillness, she felt her mother's presence, not as a memory of loss, but as a pulse of pride warming her from within. Outside, the city hummed on, unaware that a woman who once arrived with nothing had risen quietly, steadily, beautifully into a millionaire, not through shortcuts, not through miracles, but through 1,000 small acts of courage stitched together over the years. A homeless girl had crossed an ocean, a stranger had rebuilt her future, and now Marisol rebuilt futures every single day. Her story was no longer just survival, it was legacy.